Zoro, welcome to the Drum Syndicate podcast. How you doing today?
I am doing fantastic, man. How are you guys?
Doing
Good.
great. Yeah, I'm Bill. This is Marcos. You know, when we look at your career in music, I mean, it's really awesome. Lenny Kravitz, Bobby Brown, Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons, New Edition, Jody Watley, Sean Lennon, Philip Bailey. You're also an author, a clinician, an educator, and even a motivational speaker. Wow, you fit in a lot.
Well, I can only use the natural gifts that God gave me. There are four things that I have propensity to do well, none of which I earned. They're just gifts. God gave me an ability to have rhythm with a drummer, speaker, a teacher, and a writer. And those are the four things that I have. Everything else I'm not good at. But those four I've worked on and developed most of my life, continued to develop and still continuing to develop those gifts. And some people are kind of singular, like they're just an actor and that's their thing, and that they stay in that stream and that's it. But the way I'm wired, I enjoy all of those expressions equally. I enjoy the drumming, the teaching, the writing, and the speaking equally. And I wouldn't be happy if I only did just one. And just like you see certain actors, they start off as actors like Ron Howard, then eventually they become like a director. And that's a lot of artists. You have other expressions, and you express them at different seasons in your life as they feel age appropriate. But that's kind of me. Those are the four things that make me go.
Yeah, it's awesome. I think you have less chance of burnout if you diversify into other areas.
Well, also it allows you to reach different people. There are people I have reached and touched and inspired with my books that I'll never meet at a drum clinic because they're not a drummer, and there are people that I'll meet in motivational speaking and be able to touch and inspire that I won't meet in the other environments. Each one of those gifts really just allows me access to a different group of people's hearts. Because my whole goal in life is to impact people in some kind of positive way that I made a difference with either my drumming, speaking, teaching, writing, or personal encounters with me.
Well, you've always been an entrepreneur, even at a very young age. I think it was in junior high. Really skinny. You got picked on a lot, and so you invested in a book on, was it karate or
Judo.
jujitsu? Judo. Okay, you bought a book and you convinced people that you knew how to do judo, and at junior high school, and you started giving judo lessons and charging people.
Well, that you remember that obviously from my memoir, Maria's Scarf, that I wrote. I grew up in a desperate childhood. I grew up with a single immigrant mother who raised seven children alone. We lived in Compton. We lived in the hood. At one point, we moved to Oregon, and at one point, we wound up living in our 1962 Chevy Nova. So I had a very unstable childhood, very difficult. We lived in dire circumstances most of the time. And so I think out of that desperation comes inventiveness. You know what I mean? You get the spirit of entrepreneurship out of desperation. When you're not desperate, you don't come up with things, but when you're desperate, it makes you have to figure out a way. And the funny part of that story is I didn't even buy the book. I found it in a dumpster. I was dumpster diving looking for just anything of worth or value. And I found this book. It was called Boys Judo. And I wasn't actually in junior high. I was in elementary school. I was going into the fourth grade. I was a new student in this school in Oregon, which was a completely new environment for me. And I knew that how you conduct yourself in those first few days sets a precedent. And so I thought, just being kind of the kid I was selling stuff on the streets in Compton when I was 6, 7 years old, just figuring out a way to hustle a living, right? Any of my dreams I had to figure out a way to finance myself because my mother was just strapped, with the seven children. So if there was something I wanted to do, I had to dream about devise a way. Well, how am I going to get these things or do these things? So that made me very creative. But anyway, so when I got the book, uh, instantly in my head, as soon as I saw it, said Boys Judo. It was just like 8.5 by 11 size paperback book, and it had all the diagrams of how to do the judo and everything. And instantly, as soon as I saw it, I just thought, I'm a judo expert. Like I didn't, there wasn't any debate going on. I'm like, That's what I am. I'm a kung fu expert. And I convinced myself that I was, because I had the enriched, valuable knowledge in my hands that no other kid had. So when I went to school that first day, I just told everyone I was a kung fu master, because in my mind I had the book and I know more than you. And so and I said, but I can teach you guys if you want to learn. And so every night I would study the book and learn the moves and work on them with my brother. So in a way, I was a little bit of a con man, but at the same time, I felt like I knew more than they did because I had the book. So I'm going to teach you what I'm learning from the book. And they lined up, and I was getting 25 cents a kid, and that's and but at the end when I made the money I did, the principal busted me by the end of the week and put a stop to my organization. But by then I'd already made, like, I don't know, 13 or $14, most of which I gave to my mother to buy insulation so he wouldn't freeze in the winter. But anyway, that's the way I grew up. And I think that that situation that I was in was indicative of how I would become later in my life, because everything I've done, the drumming, the speaking, the teaching, the writing, everything I do because I'm compelled to do. I never approached and did any of them um, to get rich or thinking, like I never did any of it for money. Like all the books that I wrote, when I wrote the Commandments of R&B Drumming, when I wrote that whole book, it took me years to write. I I would have written that book if nobody published it, because I was passionate about R&B and giving credit to all of my heroes of R&B drumming, which were never in the magazines, and they weren't talked about. All the like the rock drummers were always talked about, and the jazz drummers. And the R&B drummers were like the bastard children of the music industry. Nobody talked about it, nobody cared. So I was going to write about these guys and about this art form no matter what. And then eventually I got a publishing deal with Warner Brothers Music, and it became a very big book in the drum world. And the same with everything. When I began my speaking career, I spoke everywhere I could for free. I mean, like churches, prisons, schools, whatever, just because I wanted to share things with people. So, I mean, that's kind of a message for people. Like life is short. And so you have to spend the most of it pursuing the thing you're compelled to do, not just looking at what's logical and what makes sense and what you can make money at, because I think there's something to say about living your life doing what you're supposed to do. That's not to say that sometimes you don't have to pick up jobs here and then just to make a living. And, the Apostle Paul had to build tents while he was a evangelist. So sometimes we have to do other things, and I certainly have at times. But I was always compelled to pursue the thing that I was most passionate about. And those were the things I was passionate about. And then I think what comes out, at least from what people have told me, in my drumming and my speaking and my teaching and my writing, what comes out is this authenticity, this passion, this genuine, like I put my heart and soul into every note, into every word that I write, every word that I speak, because everything matters to me. So nothing was just kind of like haphazardly, I'll just go about it, see whatever. If people looked in my library to see how many books I read and studied to write my memoir, Maria's Scarf, that's just came out this year, I've read over 300 books on the craft of writing memoir and studying how to tell. I knew I had a compelling story, but like to learn the craft of how you tell it is a whole different thing. Writing my drum books and my other motivational books, I wrote The Big Gig, which became a really great standard book in the industry about how to make it as a musician. Warner Brothers also produced that. Those books I equate to being like a pediatrician. Writing a memoir, I equate to being like a neurosurgeon. It's a completely higher level of study and craft. Kind of like being a basic rock drummer is one thing, but being like a ridiculous jazz fusion drummer, is a whole nother thing. It's a different level of study. One is not less than the other, but one requires a much higher degree of study and understanding, and one doesn't gain you entrance into the other. Just because you could play in the group Kiss doesn't mean you could play with the Mahavishnu Orchestra, and nothing against any of them, but it's just there's different levels of study, right? And so I guess I wanted to share that story so much to inspire people that I was willing to work on it for like 15 years and study the craft, because I felt like the most important thing I could do is share this story, because that would be my legacy of how I could help inspire generations of people that I may never meet, or generations of people when I'm no longer here that will be able to read that story.
Okay, so yeah, here's the book. It's called Maria's Scarf. There's a picture of your beautiful mama
Yeah.
on the cover, and then also a picture of you with like 3 teeth. You were very, very young, and yeah, which you sent me this book. Thank you very much. It's a real page turner. I People that know me know I really don't like to sit down and read books. But I read this one quickly because it's hard to put down. And the theme throughout the book is that you grew up very poor, as you were saying. Your mom raised 7 kids. Your dad abandoned you when you were 6 months old, and he was really not a part of your life. You didn't actually meet him. I believe it was for your high school graduation.
Yeah, that's the first time I met him.
Okay. And he gave you $100, and I don't think he even gave you a hug. Is that right?
No, he wasn't that type of a dude.
Yeah. And in fact, you changed your name legally to Zoro.
Yep.
with 1 R to make it different than the character that everybody knows. You did that because you didn't want to associate yourself with his last name.
That, and also the fact that the Zorro thing had become a nickname because I started wearing this Spanish bolero gaucho hat, in the early 80s. And my mother would say, "Oh, you look like Zorro. You should call yourself Zorro." Because I always had a heart for the underdog, and Zorro, the real Zorro, was a person who fought for the lower classes. He fought for the underdog. He fought the aristocracy for the causes of the common man, And so I always kind of had that heart. If I saw a kid in school who was being bullied by other people, I would stick up for them, or I would fight for other people that were not treated right. And so that was kind of the heart of Zorro. So it was, and the fact that it tied in with my Mexican heritage, So for both reasons, that was the reason why I changed my name.
Right. And you actually mentioned that you didn't feel, because you're half Mexican, half white, you didn't feel like a Mexican kid or like a white kid. You felt more like a black kid because of the music that you listened to, that you grew up with.
It's very interesting because I spent my formative years in Compton, California, which is almost a 90% black community. Here's the thing, it doesn't matter what color someone is. If you threw a black guy, a Mexican guy, and a white guy, and they grew up in Russia all of their life, they would all feel Russian. You know what I mean? The color of their skin doesn't matter. Culturally, they are what they grow up in. So I grew up in that area. And so culturally, I felt black, and all the music that I listened to, and my friends and the neighborhood was a black cultural community. Then you throw this kid in Grants Pass, Oregon, which is a totally white backwoods community, a lot of it kind of redneck, and a lot of it kind of racist. All of a sudden, like, you don't fit into that community. And so when I was like 14, I kind of looked in the mirror once, and I'm like, I'm not Mexican enough to be Mexican, because I am Mexican by blood, but I didn't grow up in Mexico and I don't speak Spanish. I'm not white enough to be accepted by the white people where I live, because they see my mother and they see me as Mexican. So they immediately don't want to accept me. And then there's no black people around, which is the people I grew up with, and I feel black inside. So like I felt like didn't connect to any group of people. I didn't connect to the white Irish side of my father because he was not in my life and I didn't know any of those people. But it's really kind of ironic because that's how I felt at 14, 12, I mean, it's teenage years, right? Then when I was 22 and I landed the gig with the New Edition, and they were like really huge in the 80s, like 83. They kind of dominated the 80s as a boy band. They were like the Jackson 5 of the 80s. And when I got that gig, it wasn't very long before I became I was like a teen star. I was a teen centerfold, which was very unusual because I was just a sideman like anybody else would have had that gig. I was a sideman. But you never see sidemen who become like teen stars of the group they play for. But the Zorro thing just sort of clicked with the public, and it became like a thing where I became like in all the black fan magazines and white fan magazines, they had like win a date with Zoro contest. I became white teen centerfold of the month, Latin teen centerfold of the month, and believe it or not, black teen centerfold of the month. And so I thought, God has a real sense of humor because as a kid, I wasn't accepted by any of those groups. And then as a very young man, all of a sudden everyone connects with me. Victory feels so much better after trials and tribulations. You know what I mean? Like there's just something about when you it's like when my book Maria's Scarf came out, people will assume that it just happened because whatever, I'm Zorro and I've had this 40-year career with people and they think, oh, he just got a book deal because he's Zorro. What they won't know is that it was turned down over 100 times in 15 years by all kinds of publishers and editors and agents. But I refused to give up because I knew what I had. And so there's something so rewarding about when it finally came out and it begins to touch people around the world because it was so much work and struggle and hardship to get there. And that's literally been the story of my entire life. So the whole book is this overcoming story of this kid with a dream, this bond between a mother and a son, and an unbreakable bond of a family. And it gives people hope. But the whole theme of the book is this overcoming theme in the spirit of like Rocky, Rudy the Blind Side meets Forrest Gump. And yet the story of the story coming to life is a continuation of the overcoming theme of my life because it's 15 years of rejections and over 100 rejections and all the years of toil and labor to write a book that would be quality enough to touch people's hearts and be published by a major publisher, which it was. And then recently it just won most inspirational nonfiction book at an international literary awards. And so that feels very rewarding after all that. So I guess if I have a story to share with people, it's my entire story, my life story is that, never give up. And that if you're willing to do the work and willing to withstand the pain of rejection, whether you're a player, a speaker, a teacher, a writer, actually anything, and you're willing to go back to the drawing table to retool, to recalibrate, to reassess, to rewrite, to reboot, whatever you have to do to make your product or you and take it to a higher level. If you're willing to do that, then nothing can really stop you, provided that you have the natural talent for whatever it is you're pursuing. Sometimes people pursue things outside of what they're naturally gifted at. You'll see that a lot when you see people on American Idol, people who can't sing at all are hoping to be a great famous singer. It's like, I wouldn't expect to be like the lead architect on some bazillion-dollar building if I had no architectural gifting or gifting for drafting I wouldn't expect to be a top accountant without some sort of a banking gift, some sort of accounting numbers gift. You know what I mean? Like it has to be it has to be incongruent with the skills that you're kind of naturally gifted at because that's something you cannot do. You cannot give yourself a talent you don't possess. What you could do is you could, like, let's say none of us have a athletic ability, but we took tennis lessons from the best tennis pros in the world. In 5 years from now, we'd all be better. You know what I mean? But we would never be some super pro because it's just not in our instinct to have it, right? So I think the big mistake is people try to do something or pursue something they're not gifted at instead of just going, what am I naturally gifted at? And let me pursue that. And then if you pursue that, well, you already have the gift. I look at it like, God's gift to humanity was the gifts and talents he gave each of us. Our gift to God and back to the world is what we do with them. And ultimately, who benefits from us having lived with that gift or talent, you know? And a lot of that comes down to, honestly, a lot of that comes down to humility and service. If you're a super famous, successful drummer, but you're an arrogant a-hole to everybody that meets you, how are you a blessing to anybody other than they were inspired by your music, but they weren't inspired by you as a person, And so remember, the gift is always free. Anybody who has is gifted at something, who has incredible natural talent, whether it's athletic, scientific, or musical or whatever, or arts, it was a free gift. You did nothing to earn the gift. All you did was develop something that was already there in your bank account. It's kind of like boasting if you're like Bill Gates's kid You're boasting that you made a lot of money. Well, you started off with a dad who gave you millions of dollars to start your business with. Like, don't get so cocky. You know what I mean? Like, you didn't do this on your own. And none of us really have given ourselves any gifts or talents. We just recognize them, and then we do our part, which is a lot of work, to develop them into more. It's like the parable of the talents in the Bible. It's like God gives you something. At the end of your life, he expects you to have multiplied it. And if you didn't multiply it, you were a wicked servant. But if you did multiply it, which means you turned it into more, then you were a good servant. And that's really what I've tried to do, is take the little seeds of potential that I recognized and go, like, I'm going to turn this into more. And at the same time, I'm going to use it to inspire, touch, encourage, bless, bring happiness to people, to make a difference in that way, not just in the craft itself, but in the encounters when people meet me, because I meet people all over the world doing what I do, whether I'm speaking, teaching, writing. I mean, I've spoken at San Quentin to the most hardened criminals in the world, and I've been at the White House, so I've been with the highest people in the world, and I've been with the lowest people of the world. And to me, they're all just people. They all need a touch of love. They all need a touch of inspiration and hope and encouragement. And that's what I do. And those gifts just allow me access to people.
And you inspired me when I saw you at a Sam Ash do a drum clinic. It's probably in the 90s, I'm guessing. And what I walked away from that clinic was like the most important thing is groove is more important than the chops. The chops are the icing on top. But man, if you don't have the groove, you're not hired for your fills. You're hired for your groove. And you kind of helped me establish that.
Well, that's awesome. It's so nice to know that you attended one of my clinics. I did thousands of them, and you just never know who's there. I've done clinics like at the different chains, Guitar Center, Mars, Sam Ash, and then of course all the independent drum shops. And once in a while I'll meet somebody that'll say, "Hey, I was 10 years old and I was in Guitar Center and I wasn't even playing an instrument. My mom was in there to buy something for my brother. And then we saw you doing a clinic and we just decided to sit down. Then we stayed for the whole clinic. And then this guy would be like 25 years old now or 30 saying, I'm a drummer now because you inspired me to play when I saw you. So I'll hear these random stories of people. And it's just very cool just to know that something that I did or said inspired somebody to actually pick up the instrument.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's been a couple months since I read this book, so I just don't remember all the details, but I want to put out there how poor your family was. There was a passage that I read, I think it was when you guys were still living in Compton.
Yeah.
You were passing around, it might have been a Pop-Tart. That's how poor you were. It was something like that. You were passing around, do you remember what that was?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Well, that was not uncommon during a lot of different seasons, both in Compton and both in when we moved to Oregon. In fact, when we moved to Oregon, we literally lived
In the car.
we lived in a 1962 Chevy Nova on a little plot of land. We didn't have running water. We didn't have electricity. We didn't have a bathroom, and we slept in the car. And then my sister eventually gave us her little 12-foot little camper. Then we slept between the car and the camper. And then we got a tent. This is all on a little piece of property out in the middle of nowhere. But I remember it was the pastor at the Baptist church. It's called Faith Baptist Church in Grants Pass, Oregon, who actually let us shower at his house because we were showering in the park during that summer.
Cold shower.
Yeah, cold showers. Yeah, and that's how we lived. So I think that I am so grateful. At the time, I wasn't. At the time, I was humiliated by many people. I was embarrassed. I was ashamed. I was ashamed of how we lived when I saw all the other kids living differently. But now, when I look back, I go, what a gift that was, because that's what gave me tenacity. That's what gave me resilience. That's also what has given me compassion and mercy and empathy on other people. It's the reason why I do sort of the ministry work I do around the world, which drumming is always a part of that, is because I have a heart for humanity. I have a heart for people that are struggling, and I know that people need to be encouraged because I just have to look back in my life and go, man, I needed encouragement throughout my life so much because without a father and just struggling like that. But there were a few faithful people who came along the path. I was a part of that Big Brothers Big Sisters program when I was a kid, and the couple that took me on as they're little, they call them. We're littles, they're bigs. The couple that took me on, they loved on me and me and my younger brother and younger sister, and that just made a difference. And in fact, it was in their living room that I banged on the first set of real drums I ever played on because their real son, a real son like I'm Pinocchio, their son from their own marriage was a drummer, and he was in a rock band, like a popular working rock band in Oregon. And when I saw those drums, I lit up. And I remember watching the Elvis Aloha from Hawaii special that he did. It was the first global satellite broadcast of its kind in the world. And we watched that concert at their house, and afterwards, their son let me bang on the drums. And my big brother, big sister, their name was Beverly and Bill Large, and they shot some Super 8 footage of me just banging on the drums. I didn't know how to play. I had never played. I was holding the sticks like I was holding both hands like traditional grip, like I didn't even know what you do. I was just banging on them. But before they died, I stayed friends with them for like 40, 45 years. Before they passed away, they sent me the Super 8 footage of me playing on that drum set. So I have that footage of me at 12 years old hitting those drums, but not knowing that I was going to be a drummer. And it wouldn't be until 4 years later when I actually got a set and started playing when I was 16. But see, that's the impact that people can have on your life, right? There's all of our lives can be traced to turning points and encounters with people that made a difference, whether it was positive or negative. If you end up doing a lot of bad things in your life, you're going to trace it down to an encounter with somebody that led you astray or that influenced you in a wrong direction. If you did something great with your life, you're going to be able to trace a pattern back to somebody who gave you a kind word, a school teacher, or loved on you. And so ultimately, we're all here to make a difference. That's the great privilege. And so when I look back on all the poverty. And I just look back and I go, my mother was tenacious. My mother was filled with faith, filled with love and hope. And she had hope when there was nothing to hope in. So I kind of inherited her DNA for being positive and for being upbeat. And so, but that also has made me uh, a person who I go out of my way to make sure people feel uplifted and kind because I remember what it feels like when people would put you down, and so I want to be a light to people. I don't want to be I don't want to be bringing a dark cloud over people. I want to lift them up out of the dark cloud. But I know I wouldn't have become this way, and I wouldn't play the grooves and the way that I play with the fire that people say I play with. That wouldn't have come out of a comfy, cozy life. This came out of desperation. And that gives you like a real heart in everything you do. Because to me, everything matters. It's all important.
Yeah. Now, I would assume that having that heart and that feel for empathy for other people has got to come out in your drumming and your music. And one of my questions too is when you're playing, since you've done so much recording and touring, how are you feeling that time when you're playing? Are you feeling it in your chest? Are you body motion, bouncing your legs, clicking your teeth? How are you feeling the time?
All of it. I feel it all. It's kind of like, and when Elvis came on the scene and he would dance and he would gyrate. And at the time in the 50s, they gave him like a hell about that. And they were saying he was a devil and he was this and all that. And he was just saying, I can't help it, man. That's just how I'm feeling the music. You know what I mean? Like it was in his soul. And for me, it's the same thing. Like music was in my soul before I was born. God put it in there. So when I came out, man, and I started hearing soul music, it was just like a magnetic force that like all I had to do was hear that and then my soul was lit up. So I feel it in my heart, I feel it in my soul, I feel it in my body, I feel it in my limbs, I feel it everywhere. I feel the groove and I love grooving. There's a line from the movie Chariots of Fire. It was a famous movie that won a lot of Academy Awards back in the 80s. But there was a line in there when the runner and he said something like, you know, he was talking about his relationship with God, and he goes, when I run, I feel His pleasure. like he feels God. And that's exactly what it is. When I drum and when I feel that groove, when I feel the feel of the music and the power and the soul of the music, I feel his pleasure. I feel like I'm at one with God. Like whoever God is, he has put this passion inside of human beings to connect with him on a deeper spiritual level through whatever that art form is, through whatever that passion is. And when you're doing it at that really high level, whatever you're doing, there is a deeper connection that's otherworldly. Look at music. It's invisible. You do not see music. You cannot touch music. You, you feel music. And music is the only expression that really makes you sense an otherworldly experience. Like it feels like there are times when I've been next to my favorite drummers, sat right behind them, and they played. And I literally was so filled with emotion. I had nothing left to do but cry. It was so freaking awesome that just like tears came down my like I couldn't process how amazing that feeling is. And that's also how I feel when I'm playing and I feel really connected to a groove. I feel connected to my maker. So I really always love that line from Chariots of Fire. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. When I drum, I feel his pleasure, you know. And Quincy Jones used to always talk about how he goes, when I would do a recording session, he goes, you always got to make room for God in the session. You prepare, you do what you're going to do, but then you got to make room for God to do the magic because the magic comes and nobody knows how it comes. It's like it blows in and blows out. You don't know what, and all of a sudden you had an inspired moment that just connected with everyone who ever listened to it. And it doesn't even matter how old a song is. Uh, there are songs that will touch people as long as there's an ability to hear recorded music. Because I always feel like when something's great, it's great for all time. It's not great just when it was created. And if every other subsequent generation could have access to that art, they too will be touched and inspired by it. Unfortunately, we only have recorded music for like, about 100 years or so, or maybe less, but, when Thomas Edison invented the talking machine. Prior to that, all the music that was recorded in the history of the world, you can only hear it live. You could never hear it again. And so we're so lucky that when we love something, we're able to listen to it over and over again, or read it over and over again, or watch it over and over again, right? But the other generations couldn't do that, not with watching something or listening to something. So I think there's something beautiful about that. But music is an otherworldly experience. Of all the art forms, it is the most powerful because, like Marcus read my book, a couple months ago,
Yep.
couple months ago. Okay. And that's not that long ago. And like you said, I can't remember all the details now. I watch movies, an entire movie, and 6 months later, I could be watching that movie again. And halfway into it, I go, this looks familiar. And then I'll go, I think I remember. I think I know what's going to happen. I mean, that's how quickly we forget, right? I promise you, if you hear a song that you heard when you were 12 years old and you're riding on your Schwinn bike, you're going to remember exactly where you lived. You're going to remember what it felt like. You're going to remember it. It takes you right back. It makes a spiritual, physical imprint on your soul, and you can remember everything about it and what your life was like at that time. The only thing that does that is music and smells. When you smell something, you'll go, this reminds me of my grandmother's cooking, or this reminds me of that camp I went to when I was a kid. If there's something, it sears an imprint. But music, of all the art forms, is the strongest, and it is the only one that kind of represents another world that we have yet to see, which is heaven. It is the greatest of all the art forms. So it's funny when you talk about time. Time is an interesting thing. There's a book called Sticks and Skins. It's a big tabletop book that came out maybe 15 years ago or so, by a woman named Jules Follett. It's the only big tabletop drumming book I know of, and it has all these world-renowned drummers in it. They asked me to write the forward to it, and I wrote the forward to it, and I wrote something about, and it's actually the opening of my memoir. I talk about, I take people, I say it's 1985. I'm in front of the Washington Monument in Washington, D.C. There's over 1 million people gathered for a free concert of the 4th of July, and I'm playing, and it's televised. And I'm playing with New Edition. And then there's a breakdown. There's a drum breakdown in the song "Mr. Telephone Man," and And I realized at that moment I was given an epiphany, like with two little tiny pieces of wood, two sticks, I have been given the ability to command 1 million people to move at a certain pace, at a certain tempo. And all those people are bobbing their head to my drum beat. And if I stop, they stop bobbing their head. And that's when I just got the revelation of the power of rhythm, that like if there were 10 million people, they would have been moving to what I did. And it was a great responsibility. It was a great gift from God. Then I thought, time itself is a weird concept, right? You have time, eternity. Like outside of time, we don't even understand what eternity is. We don't even understand something that doesn't have a beginning and doesn't have an end. It's just eternal, right? But within finite time is the human existence. Finite time, 10,000 years, 1,000 years, 100 years, a year, a month, a day, a week, 24 hours, an hour, minutes. Then in between all of that, dice it down, and we've got beats per minute. So we've got all this time whittled down to BPMs, beats per minute. And so, in a way, we are the gatekeepers of finite time. We organize that small increment of time in a way that connects with the soul of a human being through rhythm, because the earth is rhythmic, the universe is rhythmic, and mankind is rhythmic. And you look at little babies and 6 months or a year or 2 years old, they don't know anything. But you put on some funky music and you'll see them bobbing their body to the quarter note, to the pulse of the groove. And you go, what is that? Except, but that we were endowed with this innate love for rhythm. And in every culture from the beginning of time, mankind has been able to create rhythm from whatever instruments they could make from whatever resources were there. And they could dance from day one. And from day one, every culture dances and every culture makes music. So it's a really great thing to know that for us drummers, that one of the gifts we have is to bring joy to the world through the gift of rhythm, and to connect people to that rhythm that's inside of them. And even people, they'll say, oh, white people clap on 1 and 3 and they don't have any rhythm. But every human being has a degree of rhythm. Some have a heightened sense of rhythm and they could really feel it and really move in time. But we all have an element of time in us, right? Which is why we all like some kind of music, right? And that music, connects us with that thing. But yeah, anyway, it's a great thing to know that when you ask about time, it is a complex subject. And when I think about my favorite drummers, or what attracts us to liking certain players more than others per se, for me it always comes down to an issue of heart. It always, because there's a difference between precision and passion. You can play something in time and it be very precise, but yet it lacks the soul that I would need to fall in love with it. On a metronome, I could go, everything's perfect, no wrong notes, but I'm not feeling that heart and soul, right? And so when it comes down to it, when people are moved by music, or even by a film or by a book, what moves them is that something emotional element in it that they can't define. They can't say, oh, I liked it because of the way this drummer played his hi-hats. They don't know that, but they just know intuitively if they're feeling something that's they're connecting with. So I kind of tell people this, no matter your art form, our job as a drummer, my job as a drummer, as a writer, and as a speaker is the same exact job. Your job as a filmmaker, your job as a baritone sax player, whatever your shtick is, our job is actually all the same job. And that is to elicit emotion, make people feel something deeply. If your book is not making people feel something, it's not a good book. If your music is not making people feel something, it's not good. It's okay, but your job is to elicit emotion. And next to food, clothing, and shelter, mankind lives off of story. We live off of story. This is how we make sense of society. Stories are told on the walls of caves. Stories are told through ancient writings and on parchment paper. Stories are told verbally from one generation to the next. Stories are told in video podcasts, movies, every art form there is, what are we doing? We're telling stories. That's how we exist, from story. We make sense of life from story. Every lyric of a song is telling a story that a certain amount of people relate to. So that is what I'm trying to do when I'm drumming. And it's funny how similar drumming and writing really are. Because in the beginning, you have to learn all the fundamentals, all the basics. You have to learn all of the language, all of the vocabulary. And in the beginning of yourself as a drummer, in the beginning of your career as a drummer and writer, you will tend to over drum and overwrite, because now you've learned all these big words and now you're trying to squeeze them in everything. When you mature, you learn that less is more, and you use just the right word, just the right feel, and you resist the temptation to flex and show everybody all the stuff you know, and you serve the story. And there's a book on writing. It's called The Elements of Style, and one of the lines in there, it says, "Omit needless words." A sentence, you can make a sentence really long and it's just cumbersome, and you could have said that in half the amount of words. Well, drumming's the same way. Omit needless fills, omit needless patterns. You know what I mean? Just play what is necessary. The song itself, the lyric, the music is a story. Now, how are you serving that story with the time that you're serving and the words you choose to say and the heart you're performing with? Which again, it's always going to come down to, people are moved by your heart. They're moved by your passion, not your precision, right? You can be super accurate and super unsoulful. And there are plenty of players like that. And then there are those people that might even be less educated, but man, they just play from the core of their gut, and they're just feeling every note. When I would used to do clinics at universities, in the drum department, they would be a lot less attended than, let's say, a big clinic at a festival or something, right? And so sometimes when you get to a school, there's only 6 kids in the drum department. It's not a super motivating audience that's going to cheer you on, because they don't even know how to act. They just sit there like they've never seen anything like this before. They don't, and you play your best thing, and afterwards there's not even a peep or a clap. And I always would tell them, I'd say, look, if you want me to perform better, I got to feel something. If I don't feel something from you, you know what I mean? You're gonna heighten my performance if I feel the love in the room, right? But on the other hand, I also tell performers, I say, you've got to make sure you're having a good time, whether nobody claps. And that's often what happens in those smaller environments, is people aren't comfortable, so they don't even clap. It's not that they don't love it, because afterwards they come up to you and they say it's the most amazing thing they've ever seen. But I'm going, well, I couldn't tell from your face or your reaction. But so as an artist, you have got to learn to enjoy every second of what you're doing, because if you do, then the audience is going to feel what you're feeling. And Quincy Jones, who I knew, and he endorsed my book, The Big Gig, was very kind and gracious of him. He used to say, he goes, because so many people asked him, about the Thriller album, being the biggest selling album of all time. Like, did you know when you were doing that? Did you go for that? Were you trying to create a record? He goes, you can't do that. No one can do that. He goes, you try to do that, it's over. He goes, what you're trying to do is you're trying to make music that makes the hair on your own arms raise. You know what I mean? You're trying to make music that's touching your heart, that's hitting you so hard, and that's what you go for. It's got to move you, because if it moves you and you're really moved by it, there's a good chance it's going to move other people. And when I was writing my memoir, Maria's Scarf, working on that for all those years and rewriting and rewriting and rewriting, there would be certain passages that I would write. And then when I was done, like, I was either laughing my ass off because I thought this is freaking hilarious, or I was weeping because this is so moving. Not saying that I'm so great, but the whole point is it's got to move you first. If you're writing something that's not even moving you, how's it going to move the next person? If you're playing something on the drums and it's not even moving you, how is it going to move the next person? So the goal is really uh, introspective, in the sense that it's got to be compelling to you. It's got to be moving to you. And you got to realize, I'm serving the song, I'm serving the chapter. I had to learn how to, my book's 400 pages, but it reads like that. It flies off the page. That's a skill that took me many years. How many of us know you can watch a 90-minute movie that feels like 3 hours long because it's so freaking boring? Or you can watch a 3 hour movie you wish would go for another 2 hours because it was so action packed. It's all in how you tell the story. It's all in how you edit. And playing drums is the same way. You know, A 2 minute song could be so compelling, or a 7 minute song could be boring as hell. It's all in how you tell the story and the passion in which you're telling the story. And a lot of that is learning what to, not just what to play, but what not to play. Miles Davis used to have a quote. He said, "Play the notes that are not there." You know what I mean? In other words, the space is what creates the space between the notes is what makes certain grooves feel a certain way. It's the notes that are left out that make the other notes stand out, right? So right. That's an ongoing art form. You're constantly trying to learn to refine. And I was hanging out with my friend Steve Gadd the other night. He invited me to see him with James Taylor, and I've known Steve for 40 years. 40 years we've been friends, and Steve is getting closer to 80, and he played so stinking beautifully with James Taylor. And I told him, I said, man, you are just continuously getting better. Like, he's like, oh man. And he goes, and he said, this is what he told me. He said, well, every night before I go on stage, I pray and I ask the Holy Spirit to help me get out of the way. He goes, I just want to get out of the way and completely put my ego aside so I can best serve this music. And I thought that's the most profound thing you could ever say, or he's always had the heart of a servant. He's always had a heart of gratitude. He you often play like you are. You know what I mean? Like you can't play who you're not. Steve is a beautiful soul who loves people, who is humble and passionate. So he plays that way. He serves the song. He knows the song is king, not him. He never tries to play in a way that where he stands out. He's trying to go, what works for the song? And yet he's still trying to do that at almost 80, right? Still, and I just said the nuances and the refinement in your playing are just like wine that's been sitting in the cellar for 200 years. It's just you can't cop that. The wisdom of those kind of choices and that kind of touch and control and delicacy, whether you're a writer, a screenwriter, an actor, or a drummer, comes from time invested on the instrument, experience and wisdom. You might have more chops when you're younger, but you won't have that wisdom of what to do with it till you've been in this game longer. And so it's a beautiful thing that we could keep evolving and keep improving, and there's just no end to it.